Okay, so we can move to our second keynote. It is my pleasure today to welcome Susan Leavy here with us. Susan is professor at the School of Information and Communication at University College of Dublin and founded investigator with the Insight Center for Data Analytics. Research is strictly connected with AI ethics and digital policy. And she's also one of the Irish government's nominees for the GPI, and she's member of the Irish Government AI Advisory Council. So it's really a pleasure. Today she will give a talk about artificial intelligence, bias, and society. Susan, thank you so much. The floor is yours.
Thank you. Hi, everyone. It's great to be here. Okay. Great. Is that? Okay. And I hope I'm terrible at using clickers, so hopefully. Okay. Hi, everyone. It's really great to be here. So to give an introduction to me and how I came to this topic, in case it's useful. So I originally, my background was English and philosophy, and I studied AI then as a linked, from philosophy back in literally the last century. So I've been at this some time and worked in technology in the private sector for a time as well, and then came back and brought AI, and I did gender studies and brought AI and gender studies together in this PhD, right? And I used at the time, this was, when did I start this? 2010, I started the PhD around then. And I used machine learning because it was amazing at finding bias. And I was looking at women politicians in the media. And then I went on to look at, it was big cultural analytics projects, like 40,000 books from the British Library, and looking from, the late 1800s and early 1900s, and used machine learning and word embedding and all of these because, well, they were amazing because what they do is learn bias, and then they find patterns you never knew were there. Awesome for humanities research. And then these techniques started being rolled out and used for things, in systems that we were using to make decisions about people's lives. I was like, oh, hang on, this is, what this is good at is classifying, categorizing, learning all the stuff you don't even know it's learning, and reproducing that. So that's how I came to kind of bias in AI. And I'm putting this slide, this is from years ago, I had this slide, and I was just looking through and I look at it and I think, they were the good old days nearly when that was the problem. It seemed so fixable, right? We had, you'll know a lot of Joy Balwani, Timnit Gebru. You had those pieces of research, and then they made the media. You had the one where Amazon developed their system to sort CVs and had to take it down after 2 weeks because it did what you would demand. It learned about gender without being told about gender, and put women's CVs to the bottom, and the Compass algorithm. You'll probably recognize a lot of those cases. Facial recognition, Balwani did tests and found it to be biased on the basis of race and gender. And a lot of research on mitigating bias stemmed from that, around that time, and probably some of the projects in these clusters, were maybe the proposals kind of use these kind of cases at that time. And then, and those methods, it was a kind of a hopeful time because you go to conferences and there was tech companies presenting and everyone was working to try and make algorithms fairer, and they were being proliferated, but there was a big awareness, like every company had, principles and guidelines. We were going in the right direction. And then, I don't know what you think, and this is just maybe just me, but I think things changed, right? Especially in the last few months, right? And also the proliferation of kind of social media, especially among young people, and the influence. And that kind of stuff bypasses all the kind of bias mitigation methods. What they do is take people, separate them, classify them, treat them differently based on their attributes, like exactly the opposite of what we've been trying to do over years within Europe in particular, and drives towards treating people equally. And we have generative AI, which takes the internet, and uses it in ways that it was never intended to be used, and has all the issues you could imagine, with that. Okay, so I don't know about you, but I find the present climate overwhelming, because it's amazing work, but then there's recommender algorithms which are hugely powerful, and in terms of gender or race, but have the power to really, especially young people, kind of undermine some of the advances we have made, and separate people and get them, trick them into thinking things that otherwise they mightn't think, right? So hugely powerful recommender algorithms and generative AI systems that are very experimental, very exploratory, untested. And my own work was in developing methods to mitigate bias in large small language models, and then we've projects on large language models and multimodal models. But then I was at, the AI Action Summit that happened in Paris, a few weeks ago. Before that, there was a workshop, and there was one of the many godfathers of AI gave a talk, and he said, there was PhD students, and they were looking for advice on what they should do, and he said, he says, if you're studying, if you're doing a PhD, don't do LLMs. You've nothing to offer. I thought, oh my God, what have I been doing the last few years? And what a thing to say to PhD students who are probably studying LLMs, because that's why they were at that talk. So, but that is the feeling I have. I don't know if you have, of like, this has kind of gone out of control here. And, there's all this good work, but then there's all this going on. And it's hugely powerful. And is it bypassing all the good work and undermining some of the core principles in Europe of treating people equally, So how have I addressed that? I thought, well, maybe I'll talk about the different ways I'm tackling this, not just me, obviously working with different people, to try and stop being so overwhelmed, right? Oh yeah, and before I'll overwhelm you all a bit more. This is the kind of thing that gives alarm bells to me in terms of advances we've made in Europe to address bias and promote fairness. Things like this FT that published a gap, a gender ideology gap that's emerging across countries, with, especially young boys and girls diverging, with girls becoming more and more liberal and boys becoming slightly more conservative, than they were, but certainly girls are off the scale more liberal. So there's this big gap. But these people have to live together in the same country. It's a real problem. And it's not what we were working towards. Like I say that we, as in a feminist or anyone who believes perhaps in fairness and equality and an unbiased society. You have boys in particular. I'm concerned about getting very toxic views of masculinity and being fed kind of material that's quite misogynistic, promotes violence against women, and a lot of pornography that is not, in any way about women being happy. So there's this, and then you have the research on damage to mental health and just the effects on boys and girls in particular. So there's that, which is so backwards from where, I was in feminism in, 2010, that didn't feature, right? So, and the other one, just the recommender algorithms, they're so powerful and they separate people and they find out what people, not what they like, but what they can't not watch. And then we have around 2014, literacy and problem-solving abilities kind of declining, and correlates with a lot of the rise of social media algorithms, and then brain rot being Oxford Word of the Year 2024. Now, you might think, where has she gone with this? But I'm just showing that to show the power in society of AI algorithms. Hugely powerful and can really sway and direct how people think, and especially how we think about each other and how certain groups think of other groups. And evidence suggests it's not going in a good direction. All right, so what do we do about this? And there was one paper with some others. It just explores how LLMs, for example, can influence collective intelligence. Recommender algorithms can do one thing, but if we all start using the same LLMs, what does that do? I mean, a lot of good things can do a lot of good, but and anyone who's corrected assignments, I don't know if you've noticed, a lot of them are getting the same. The same kind of voice, there's a sameness emerging, and that kind of. So what did we come up with? It can reduce functional diversity among individuals, remove friction in the production of false or misleading information, illusions of consensus where it's not there. So it kind of dulls diversity in our society. I love diversity. I love difference, and it's awesome. So the kind of, if we all start using the same language model, it dulls that, but it also gives the false impression that there's a consensus when there isn't, that there's one truth and one right way and wrong way, when we all know there isn't, So what do we have, what tools do we have to use? So we have a lot, unfortunately, NIST and the Biden order, I left them there just for the Biden order, but I didn't want to take it out because the fact that it was written and it's there and people wrote it, it's still in their heads, and this kind of knowledge and work doesn't evaporate, and NIST as well is undergoing a lot of change. So Europe, in the context of NIST and Biden executive order, we have a lot to think about in Europe, because those algorithms, right, and recommender algorithms, language models, they're not European, right? They're from America. So we have no NIST, we've no Biden executive order. A lot of that research that spurred on that bias work, early bias work, came from America, okay? But that's we have to recognize that the technology now is not looking to that, but we're all using it. So Europe has a lot to think about in terms of if we want to preserve values that are fundamental in Europe, how do we address this? We have the EU AI Act, we have the Digital Services Act, and we double down on that. That's what I think. The fact that we have the AI Act and we're continuing, it makes me very, very proud to be part of Europe. But in the US, also, it goes under the radar, but the online safety bills, different countries have their own. In America, in states, there's a lot going on there. And a lot of regulation of AI comes through the online safety codes. And not many people pay attention, but they're hugely important and hugely powerful. And so very brave people can get quite radical things through. So that's one to look at. The UK have Ofcom, so that's really core AI regulation. And it's about protecting, a lot of it is about recommender algorithms. right? And solving the problems where it categorizes and treats people differently. And through the AI Act, the thing to look to is, you know, with the large models, this was put in kind of at the last minute, the regulation on language models, because when we started the AI Act, it didn't exist, right? But we have risks for general purpose AI models are harmful discrimination or disinformation at scale. So a lot of it is about putting a case together, right? This is really systemic bias in these recommender algorithms or large language models, and you know what? It represents harmful discrimination. Okay, so a lot of making sure the AI Act and Digital Services Act serves, the purposes of fairness and reducing bias is bringing cases, making sure it's implemented, supporting government, developing the tools, but the Digital Services Act as well. And this isn't a lecture on law, now don't worry, but I just wanted to, so Article 40, that, hands up, any of you aware of Article 40 in the Digital Services Act? Yeah. Okay. A good few. So this should be a game changer. And if you're not aware of it, look it up, okay, for research. So for the first time ever, because what's the problem with those hugely powerful algorithms? We don't know the data they're trained on, and we don't know how they work, but we all use them. And we see there's problems with it. So Article 40, for the first time ever, researchers can apply to gain access to data and information about algorithms and a huge swath of data. So that's amazing, you know, and it's because it's research that alerted people to the problems of bias in algorithms, and it's research that will really understand how these algorithms are perpetuating bias as well. So that's awesome. And then there's independent audits and Article 90 as well, which is interesting, just made me think in the context of the previous talk there, it mandates consultations with platform users. So this engagement, these listening, that tech companies have to, right? So, if we look at the pipeline, you have your data, you train it, and you deploy it in a system. So the data, so one part of the work, I'm involved in, and probably many of you as well, is looking at the data. Can we change the data, augment the data? What techniques, result in a better model? Sorry, so yeah. There's the training, and then you have your pre-trained model and your prediction. So it's one project in NLP is fine-tuning it. So you have your big LLM. We can't build an LLM in a research institute, but what you can do is fine-tune one. So how do you fine-tune? What can you give it gender-neutral language, and it will learn, it would disrupt some of those stereotypes in the text. Just changing things like chairman to chairperson, those feminist linguistic principles, augmenting the text, true fine-tuning, does it mitigate the bias in those systems? Right, and same with images. How looking at and one project, for example, tested the different kind of multimodal models and found that if different architectures, different kinds of models learn bias differently. Okay, so all of that, getting into the weeds of the data and also the model, and then there's a project that very much links in with the projects involved in this workshop, Diverse Affair. So it's Erasmus Plus funded. So it's a big consortium of research centres across Europe. And what do we look at? Kind of the whole developmental cycle, really. But the focus is on looking at intersectional fairness and integrating that into kind of the whole pipeline of AI development and engaging with developers and students as well, to making sure that developers understand intersectional fairness, you know, and can apply it when they're developing and building their systems. Okay, we've also created, you know, there's all these regulations, including standards like from the IEEE and ISO, which is where it's at really in developing kind of implementable techniques to mitigate bias and discrimination. We've kind of built this RAG model, so it's a language model. So say you're a developer, you know, law is so inaccessible. So if you're a developer, it's this system where you can, you know, type in your prompt or your question and you'll get a natural language response to explain concepts within this regulations. And then, you know, fair AI Scrum methodologies, you know, the whole life cycle, there's different outputs and educational outputs like teaching intersectional fairness to computer scientists in a course, in an undergraduate course. And also building transparency tools. So we have the regulations, we're you know, and that really is what the tool that can allow change at this point. It's brilliant we have it. But implementing it, law, it's all in the implementation. And the DSA could fail. And why could it fail? If there isn't the tools to implement it, if it isn't really embraced by researchers and they don't apply under Article 40, you know, it really requires people and requires researchers, because researchers can develop the tools as well as just apply for data. So that's one part of our focus. So I'll give you a quick overview of this project. So we took that Article 90 under the DSA, going, right, tech companies are mandated to engage with stakeholders. That includes children, right? And it's a minefield ethically. If anyone has run projects to engage with children, and it's getting the ethics approval over the line. And so we thought, well, we'll do it, right? So we have a playbook then. So you can go, right, there's a framework, there's a toolkit, there's how you do it. And people have to listen to teenagers who are most impacted by this. We spoke to policymakers, NGOs, industry, the whole lot. We did a whole big engagement process to find out who's doing what and what are the issues with platforms in particular, AI-driven platforms. So anyway, so we undertook that, and what came up again and again is youth mental health and really problematic content being sent to boys. And the girls, a different kind of problematic content more affects them. Whereas, yeah, so huge gender divide. That's not what we're after, right? Treating boys and girls so differently. We've kind of got away from dressing in pink and blue so much, you know, like, yeah. So it's the opposite, right, of what I certainly, as a feminist and activism over years, has been working towards. So we came up with this plan to develop the framework to be able to engage with teenagers, and a platform that will analyse recommender algorithms, how they work, because that's what's needed. So auditors need it. They're mandated to audit under the DSA. They don't. How would you even start that, right? Researchers as well. So many social science researchers will be interested in finding out how people are treated, how algorithms treat them differently online, and classify them and categorize them into groups, and what are the effects of that. But they've no tools. So not all of us sit between social science and computer science and can, you know, get some computer scientists to magic us up a tool, and it's very expensive to do that over and over again. So we're building a platform that researchers can use so they can apply for this data set and upload it in their platform and analyze it. So we're going to be agnostic in terms of the groups, the groupings we're interested in, because there's one thing that we found in research on bias in AI is that you tend to go, okay, a lot of the early research looked at male, female, as, you know, and tested it for equality. And again, you're imposing this binary view, even as you're trying to fix an issue, right? So our platform is agnostic in terms of groups like that. And that's one issue with a lot of the technical research to fix problems with bias, is that it comes up with categories, and they're not based in social science. They're based in what they think, perhaps on a given date. There's no mandate to have your categories founded in the latest social science research when you're being published in a computer science journal. Okay, so, and that's one thing to be cognizant of, you know, when critiquing some of this research. So we've done a few. There's one going on today as well with teenagers, right? And it's just some initial findings from the first pilots and the first few, was that there was huge polarization in gender, and it's AI-driven polarization. Okay, so when because, you know, I was a teenager way before there was smartphones, and, you know, I had, in many ways, things were more difficult, but I had friends who were boys. We watched the same stuff. My brothers and I watched the same movies. We weren't off in these different worlds. You know, and the boys reported getting all these car crash videos, right? Really, really violent stuff. Yeah, the girls, actually, this is one, for example, that we found, and it shows the value of listening to these users, the importance of it, is the girls were saying they'd use one of the apps, TikTok or Instagram, and look at fashion inspiration, right? And if they scroll long enough, they get pornography. And I went back to my team and I was like, is that because of computer vision? You know, you look at an image that's fashion, and there might be skin and a certain pose, and pornography might have a same kind of colors, you know, because it's skin tone and shapes and poses, because that's how computer vision works. They're like, oh yeah, that could just be a mistake. Nobody's intentionally sending 15-year-old girls pornography, and they're not looking for it, but the computer vision models, they're not that advanced. And they can mistake fashion and pornography and think they're the same thing, but they have entirely different meanings and lead you entirely different places on the internet. Okay, so another thing we're trying to do is make accessible the transparency reports under the Digital Services Act, because that's a treasure trove of information about how we're being treated and how people are being treated and what kind of stuff is being sent to them and is it being taken down. So again, the importance of the role of researchers in looking at those reports and finding, you know, problems in relation to AI bias and discrimination. And the platform we're building is, again, what does it do? It's basically, the idea is you can plug in, you have this platform, you can plug into your algorithm and your data set. And you can say, right, I'm interested in people who watch soccer and, you know, what else? I don't know. Soccer, you know, and they're online, you know, 2 hours a day, and this is how they behave. So you have these models of how they behave, and then you run, fast forward 6 months, what does their feed look like? Fast forward, you know, 12 months, what does their feed look like? And the idea is that we'll catch that stereotyping, those patterns. Okay, so you have, you know, boys who might watch soccer, but then are they getting gambling ads? Are they getting kind of Andrew Tate style influencers? Like how are they being stereotyped and funneled into very different worlds? But, you know, we're not saying attributes, we're setting it up so researchers can decide what they're interested in. And we're designing it in tandem with those workshops where we're listening directly to the young people. So a lot of this work and classifying computer vision models, right, will come from computer scientists saying, okay, I'm interested in these categories, and we'll train a classifier. So we're doing it differently. Yeah, we're listening to the teenagers, because a computer scientist does not know what 15-year-olds are finding harmful on a given day, right? They know, but the lag between them experiencing the harm, the effects of the harm, so they're presenting maybe in mental health institutions with this all sorts of disruptions in society. The research comes, and then it gets into legislation. That's like 6 years if you fast track it. Okay, so we want to shortcut that and listen. And so based on that, we're going, okay, let's not build classifiers that don't move. Like, here's a classifier for car crash videos. We'll just say, we have a method where you can use a language model, and it uses CLIP, and you as a researcher could say, I'm interested in setting in groups that are interested in car crash videos and soccer and this and the other, and it will create the classifications on the spot, right? So very much a tool for researchers and auditors to be able to respond. And it's all these kind of agentic AI, there you go. All these agents that do different things, but the idea is because a lot of, to translate a lot of this kind of quite technical, computer sciencey, computer vision language to something that's useful for auditors and researchers as well. So, you can set up your user groups, it'll classify, and now it's a very, in its infancy, this interface, so don't judge us on that, but it's going to classify the data, and it's on short videos we're focusing on, like kind of TikTok videos, so that's just an example of how it classifies it, but you can test different algorithms then and say, over time, someone starts with these interests, and then 6 months later, they'll have these suddenly, because stuff will be fed to them, right? And that window doesn't exist, bizarrely. We have no idea. All we know is there's something massive going on, and society is being hugely influenced in ways that are contrary to principles of fairness. So it's one small way we're trying to create a window into what's going on, because once people can, if it's invisible, people have nothing to fight against. Once you can see it, there's something to pin, it'll flag risk. It'll provide some kind of evidence or, to then investigate further and then bring cases under the DSA and the EU AI Act. And finally, we're setting up a Social Data Science Alliance, which is a large group of international researchers. And if you're interested, please join. Like, we'll be launching soon, but it's so researchers can come together, share tools, what works, what doesn't work, methodologies, to apply for access under Article 40, because it will take researchers working together to somewhat balance the power between tech companies and individual researchers, okay? And finally, in these, I think, quite scary times in terms of equality, and we are using tools that are, I think, undermining very core principles in Europe. I just want to look back to the Charter of Fundamental Rights of the European Union, just to remind us this is not normal. That we have legislation, core anti-discrimination legislation, and we have core rights of the child legislation, and that when we see AI algorithms and how they are treating them, it's undermining a core value. So I just wanted to remind us of the EU principles and a pathway that we can kind of challenge what's been done in society. Okay, so thank you.
So thank you so much, Susan, really, for the inspiring talk. While we ask the audience for questions, I want to ask you a thing. So you highlighted very strong points, and thanks for this. And about also the gap between girls and boys that you highlighted, and the kids. So what do you think that should be our role also in changing maybe the education, and more in general about AI literacy? What is your point about this? Should we do something?
Yeah. I think coming together in groups to in Ireland especially, there's a lot of parent groups are coming together and and a lot of schools are banning smartphones. So, and AI literacy is really, really important. But also those groups can engage with politicians. That's politicians and journalists. And that's really, really important to get online legislation developed, gone through the books, into regulation and implemented. There has to be a strong demand for this, you know, but people do feel very disempowered because there's no visibility. People have no idea, and you can pick people off individually. One child has a bad experience, but but sure, look at everybody else, it's fine. But we all intuitively know, right, that you know that the extent of the stereotyping is huge. So coming together in groups, you know, to engage with media and government, that's effective. But also recognizing that these systems are not at all safe for children. They're not safe for adults, right? But they're certainly not safe for children. They are designed to people engaged. They're not designed to present people videos that they want to watch. It's to present whatever will keep them engaged. But also, it's whatever else everybody else is engaged. So when you think about it, people pay all sorts of money to send children to some people to certain schools or hang around with certain friends or whatever. All of this social engineering goes on. But the way the engagement algorithms work, they're going, you know, you're sent stuff that, you know, are engaged with the most, and people who engage with the most are people who spend the longest online, and you know, it's just wrong-headed by design. So if you know, who'd come up with a design like this? You know, not anybody who was interested in fairness and equality in society. So they're not safe fundamentally. Yeah.
So thank you so much.
Thank you very much. I think this is a really fundamental and important problem. In my experience, the DSA so far has been largely ineffective. Most relevant digital platforms either bring very serious obstacles to data access requests, or they do the bare minimum or provide very limited or problematic data access. To the point where, you know, you start a research project and you are 1 year in the project and you still haven't got the access. So do you think this is likely to change because we are just in the beginning of the implementation?
Yeah,
are you
it will. So, because I know in the Irish case, we have the Media Commission and they, you know, so they're just setting up, right? So Article 40 is in the process of being implemented. The final act, it's still only the draft text. So it's not that, we don't have the final text for how it's going to be implemented. So, and there are stricter guidelines on how soon people have to get back. But it will require, when it does come into force fully, cooperation and balancing of power somehow. So it is all in the implementation. But it should be a game changer.
Good.
Yeah, and the EU Commission wants this to succeed, needs it to succeed. Nobody wants this to fail. It's really important that it's successful.
And the second question, if you allow me, do you think there's a kind of polarization only based on gender, or perhaps based on other kinds of identities or
totally,
aspects?
yeah. I just focused on gender, as that was my research area, and that's what came up in these focus groups. But sure, absolutely, like race, and it's grouping people in ways that we mightn't even group them, but certainly race, age as well. You know, I had to delete Pinterest. It thought, I won't even tell you what I thought I was, but it wasn't, you know, wouldn't fill you with confidence in the morning, you know. So yeah, there's a whole lot. There's age, there's gender, there's race, there's, you know, geography. That was one from the computer vision models, you know, just there's the whole lot, yeah.
So I have a question also about this polarization and separation of populations. And at a very limited level, I could see that some of this categorization could actually be beneficial. So for example, if you're a queer youth and you are you are existing in a place that doesn't have that much support for queer youth, maybe you do want an algorithm to actually push you towards supportive resources or queer content that you wouldn't get elsewhere. But how do we have systems that can sort of support minority or marginalized communities like that without going in this huge divergence, this huge difference that is so incredibly toxic that you pointed out?
Yeah, I think you design systems in a way that you can use them and they not use you, and that comes by people understanding how they're used and not being manipulated. And that's core to the prohibited. I think it's very interesting, the prohibited list under the AI Act. It's perhaps a stretch, but it says it prohibits using manipulative and subliminal techniques to change people's behavior in a way that would cause them physical or psychological harm. So if you're looking for, sure, you might want this, but there's one thing going looking for it, or but then there's another thing being manipulated. So, and that requires a system design change. So perhaps like in Europe, like if you were to build a platform that aligns with European values and those kind of design features that people want, you'd create it differently. Like it wouldn't be rocket science, I would say, but it's not the platforms we have already. They're too invisible.
Hello, and thank you for the insightful intervention. I'd like to share one of my experience. So I tried to get a job in one of the famous social network, and during one of the technical interview, they asked me to try to design a system, a recommender system, let's say. And they asked me, what is the metric? And I answered the engagement. And let's think about a long-term engagement. And the answer from them was, no, we don't optimize the long-term engagement. We just optimize the short-term engagement. The short-term engagement means just the 10 seconds ahead of the click of the user, okay? So I was wondering and hearing your intervention, your presentation, is the problem of, so from a technical perspective, because I have a technical background, is the problem of enhancing the transparency, the fairness, and all and avoiding all the problems that you have presented related to the long-term engagement, in the sense that looking at an horizon that is well over the actual experience of the user, but just thinking about 10 years, 15 years, 20 years from now, what do this platform will impact? What will be the impact of these platforms on kids, on people, on society? Okay, so can we translate, in some sense, what you are suggesting into a long-term vision that can be put inside the platforms?
I'm no expert in recommender algorithms on that. Really on them, but if these systems, right, become infrastructure, you see you're right, in the long term engagement, great. Is that a better indicator? Does that mean people are engaged over the long run because it's adding to their life or whatever? Those short-term windows, you can imagine, it's not a good way to design anything, right? So, like the best books you've read have had really dull bits, or really start slowly, or best movies, you're like, oh, here, and then they're amazing. So if you just are looking for instant gratification all the time, that's wrong-headed. Like, that's not going to improve your society, right? But there's an argument, right, that because companies won't really think in 5 or 10 year, like think of funding cycles and reporting. You know, oh, we've lost a load of users, but in 10 years they're going to be there. So it's fine. Stock price is not necessarily going to stay up, right? So you have very short-term capital, or incentives, right, to keep those users in the short run. There's no changing that through design. System, they're not going to run with a system that doesn't really maximize shareholder value that way. But if there's such a core component, if their infrastructure, maybe it should be taken out. Like maybe we need to promote systems like Blue Sky. I don't know. People talk about I don't know how it works in terms of capital, but it's more distributed. I don't know those different ways you construct systems. But does Europe need to stand back and go, okay, instead of these have become fundamental part of how we communicate, organize. They're becoming infrastructure. Is there a new model that we can go, okay, let's promote this? Because there'll come a time, that these systems can be weaponized for political ends. And as part of, does Europe need to go, okay, this is infrastructure, we need this, what kind of model protects us against that? And it's not one that needs short-term user engagement and is in the hands of a few people that we have to trust won't want to meddle with political systems. So there is quite a radical rethink needed, I would say, but it's really important and urgent in Europe.
Thank you.
That's just, I just made the, I'm really going outside my comfort zone talking about all of this, but I think it's important, So let's thank Susan again. Okay.